they put on a big show for you with often multiple jumps, and they're known to spit a fly very easily. So hooking them is not always the hardest part, but landing them is. And the other cool part about them is that, they can be found in rivers that have anywhere from class 1 to class 5 rapids. So like you just said, your indicator doesn't even move by the time one of these things is hooked in, and they're jumping, and it's that quick.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
Hey listeners, thanks for tuning in. Our show today is brought to you by JP Ross Fly Rods, makers of happiness, one fly rod at a time. Get outside and simply fish. And be sure to hit that subscribe button to get all the latest Destination Angler episodes coming your way. Word is spreading about the Destination Angler Podcast. Our listener base has doubled in just the past few months. A big thank you to all of you for telling your buddies about the podcast. And if you like the show, could you find it in your heart to leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts? I'd sure appreciate it. Coming up on the podcast, we're taking a tour of the world of saltwater billfish with Jake Jordan, pioneer and worldwide expert on chasing trophy sailfish and marlin on a fly. And man, let me tell you, Guatemala is the place to go if you're looking for 50 fish days on sailfish. And be sure to backcast to catch our last episode on the Missouri River with Whitney Gold, Headhunters Fly Shop, Craig, Montana. Whitney is a hoot and shares some pretty entertaining stories from her life as a guide and champion spaycaster and what makes this area so incredible. And today, our destination is the great state of Maine and the famous yet remote west branch of the Penobscot River. And our guest is expert angler and fly fishing guide Aaron Broaddus with Headin North Guide Service. Nestled at the very end of the Appalachian Trail at the foot of Maine's highest peak, Mount Katahdin, the West Branch is the place to go for trophy landlocked salmon. In case you don't know, landlocks are big-time jumpers and an absolute blast to catch on a fly rod. And the West Branch offers uncrowded opportunities in a wilderness setting to hook into this incredible game fish. And I say hook because landing is another thing altogether. A little bit about Aaron. Aside from being one heck of a nice guy, he was born and raised in Maine and is now a middle school teacher in the winter and a fly fishing guide in the summer. Like all top guides, Aaron has a strong passion for teaching and loves working with anglers of all levels, helping them chase big native brookies and landlocked salmon. He has a degree from St. Joe's College in finance and another degree in education from the University of New England. He's also the host of the Maine Fly Fishing Podcast, where it's his mission to educate folks on fly fishing opportunities throughout the state of Maine. So let's listen as Aaron shares where to go and how to tackle landlocked salmons on a fly rod and why Maine and the West Branch of the Penobscot is a top destination for these airborne torpedoes. So Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about Maine. So first, I got to ask you, so what's it like teaching those middle school kids? Do you get hazardous duty pay for doing that?
We don't get any extra pay, no. It's been a great year despite the pandemic and all the remote teaching and stuff. And for me, it's been personally rewarding because I just have smaller class sizes. So I've gotten to actually get to know the kids a lot better than during a typical school year, So. Oh,
that's nice. All right, so let's talk about Maine. So, in your mind, Aaron, what makes this region of the world so special, for anglers, and why are you so excited about Maine? And I got a feeling it has something to do with the diversity of the fishing opportunities there, but what do you think?
Yeah, so if you've never been to Maine, we're not in Canada, but we may as well be. We're pretty much surrounded by it on, at least half of our state. So it's a huge state. And from our southernmost city of Kittery to our northernmost town of Fort Kent, it's a 7-hour drive. So,
oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a pretty big state and there's a lot in between. And Maine has everything from mountains to lakes, ponds, rivers. We got huge coastline. I think we have like 3,500 miles of coastline or something like that, which is crazy. It's more than like the whole coastline of California. So just to kind of talk about fishing in Maine, if you start at the coast and kind of head north from there, we have killer striped bass fishing on our coast.
Right.
We get them pretty much, at the end of their journey up the East Coast, and then they hang here from kind of late May through almost October. And they're just a fantastic fish to go after and growing definitely in popularity not just in Maine, but everywhere. And they're going through struggles as an overall population too, because they're a migratory fish. And, coming up and down the coast, you got states with different laws, and it's affecting the population as a whole. So
okay,
if you haven't fished for them, come here and fish for them. And because you don't know how long that opportunity is going to be here, so.
Yeah.
If you come inland a little ways, so, our mountains, if you looked at Maine, our mountains are about kind of in the middle of our state if you went from west to east. And all of our rivers flow down from the mountains right out to the ocean. So if you come inland a little ways, we have some really great northern pike and smallmouth bass opportunities. The great Lefty Cray said his favorite place to fish for smallmouth bass was in Maine. That speaks a lot because he was down in the Chesapeake Bay area where they actually have really great smallmouth fishing there too. So
yeah,
we have pike that are over 40 inches. We have smallmouth that are, big in numbers and in size. We're kind of like a mini Canada in some ways too. And I'll talk about some other fish that we have that are pretty big up in Canada. So if you head a little more north, you may get to the mountains. And the Appalachian Trail runs all the way from Georgia to Maine, but it also runs from New Hampshire to our west, and it goes through the Rangeley region, and then it continues straight east through to the Moosehead region. That's Moosehead Lake, our biggest lake. And then it ends in Baxter State Park on beautiful Mount Katahdin. So Mount Katahdin marks the end of the Appalachian Trail. And there's some fantastic fishing around there, which we're going to get to a little bit later too. But in this mountainous range, you're going to find excellent brook trout and landlocked salmon fishing, with both of these fish reaching sizes of like Labrador proportions, believe it or not.
Yeah.
These fish can get over 20 inches, and they do exist in our rivers, our ponds, our lakes, but we don't have them in the same abundance as a place like Labrador. Obviously, our fishing pressure is just a little bit higher than a place like that. So
you're talking about brookies?
Brookies and landlocked salmon, yeah.
Okay.
And our pike, pike are big up in Canada too. So we have those all here on a smaller scale, I'd say, but you can get fish that are comparable in size to what is probably average in a place like Labrador. You go to Labrador and they say you don't measure fish in inches, you measure them in pounds up there.
Right. What are the main what are the big rivers out there, the big river systems? What should anglers know about there?
So our three biggest rivers are the Androscoggin River, the Kennebec River, and the Penobscot River. And basically the headwaters of all those rivers are places where you're going to find landlocked salmon and brook trout. There's some brown trout and rainbow trout here, but they were kind of brought here. They're not native to here. And we do have a small wild population of rainbow trout here in Maine too, but we're known for our brook trout and our landlocked salmon. And, as a guide, I'm super passionate about especially those two fish. And I get a lot of clients who come here, and they come from the south or the other states on the East Coast, and they've caught brook trout before, and they're kind of like, yeah, the biggest brookie I've caught was like 12 inches. It was awesome. It was awesome. And I was like, that's kind of a small fish here. So
yeah, we're going to light it up for you today.
Yeah, most people break their PR when they go out up here for brook trout.
That's awesome. So what kind of wildlife do you typically see when you're out there?
So in Maine, if you're in the mountain regions, you're gonna see moose. If you're out there at dusk and dawn, you'll most likely see moose. Not an animal you want to see after dark because they're as dark as the night, and they also there's not a lot of streetlights up that way. So it's they're the biggest killer of all of our animals here. We don't have any animals that are gonna kill you in the Maine woods besides a moose. So
no bears. You guys got bears, don't you?
We have black bears, but they are the most skittish animal I've ever come across. They don't stick around very long, and they don't get to huge sizes here. I mean, I guess some of them do, but it's just not an animal you see very often, although we do have a lot of them here, but they like to stay hidden. So other than that, we have a lot of white-tailed deer. We have turkeys, just like kind of a lot of the other eastern states and Midwest states. And
sure.
We have ruffed grouse here, which are really popular to hunt.
Oh, yeah.
We call them partridge here in Maine. So.
Sure. Do you hear them drumming in the spring when you're fishing?
All the time, Steve. And
isn't that awesome? I love that.
I'm waiting for that. We're about a month out from that. Maybe.
Yeah. Oh. Means things are alive and well out there.
Yeah, they're the best. I love them because you can hunt for them while and then go fishing, and you can eat them, and you can tie flies from them and catch fish on them. Like it's so cool. It's a cycle.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think of Maine as being like some areas are kind of remote, aren't they?
Super remote. So if you look at a map of Maine, our capital is in Augusta, and we call that Central Maine. So everything above Augusta, we would refer to that to as Northern Maine. And if you go above, if you look at a map, if you go above the Rangeley, the Moosehead, and the Baxter State Park region, everything northwest of that, it's over 1 million acres, and it's all logging land, and it's all pretty much uninhabited. So you want to fish remote, we got places for you here in Maine, that's for sure. You can get off the beaten path, no problem.
How do you get back in there? I mean, are there logging roads, or do you have to take helicopters or planes, or how do you get in there?
There are some places where you can take float planes into that don't have any roads to them, but we have quite an extensive logging road system here. So all the logging land is for public use, which is fantastic. We can hunt it,
really
fish it. Yeah, it's great. So we're very lucky to have that. And as long as they're logging, they're maintaining those roads, and you're not going to lose a tire every time you go out on them,
Okay, so the logging operations are still in full swing then in a lot of places.
Yes, absolutely. So I was going to talk a little bit with you about some history of Maine. And
yeah, please.
So Maine is a huge logging state. Up until the 1950s, they did log drives down all the lakes and rivers. So, we have a lot of dams in the state because of that, because they set up a lot of mills along the way. And they drove all the logs down the river until about the 1950s. But in the 50s, the logging truck was invented, and they kind of stopped doing the log drives because, one, it's just not cost effective, and two, it was super dangerous. I mean, you got people riding, not hundreds, but, 40, 50 miles on logs. They're riding on the logs on the rivers, and they're camping on the side of the rivers and then getting up next day. And it was a crazy job if you read the history about it. So
wow,
a lot more safe job, and just putting them on trucks is a lot easier. And one thing I'll tell you about logging trucks, if you get on those logging roads, if you see a logging truck coming, you do not drive by it. You pull right over. You let them go, because they do not care what is in their way. They will smash cars, moose, whatever is coming. They don't put on the brakes. So
yeah, no witnesses out there either, huh?
No, it's scary. So just a word of advice: when you come here, if you're on logging roads, pull over for those trucks. They're not going to stop.
That's a good tip, man.
Yeah. If you look kind of north of that region that I was just kind of talking about, you have what's called Aroostook County. It's our biggest county. In Maine, we call it the county, simply. And there's fantastic brook trout and landlocked salmon opportunity up there. But we also have a fish that you may be a little bit more familiar with in the Midwest. We have muskie up there.
Nice.
Muskie are what? The fish of 10,000 casts, they call them, Steve?
Yeah, maybe 20,000 on a fly rod.
I know. And you get people here who say that our muskie can be the fish of 1,000 cast. So maybe a little more, not abundant in terms of numbers, but a little easier to catch, apparently. So
you got a strip set to get those guys, don't you?
You do. And I will tell you, where you fish for muskie in the state is very, very remote where you're going to be.
Yeah. Something else I want to ask you is how are the bugs? And I'm not talking about insect hatches for trout, like black flies, mosquitoes. How is it up there?
So mosquitoes are more of our coastal and some of our southern lakes. And up north, I mean, there are mosquitoes, but they're so slow, they don't bother you. It's the black flies that are going to get you here.
Okay.
I mean, you'll just have swarms of them around your head in the months of like late May and through June. And they kind of subside in July and August.
Right.
But some people, it drives them so nuts, Steve, that they can't even keep fishing. They're like, I'm just done. They may as well be in an astronaut suit because they just can't take them, And I'm pretty infamous among my friend group of being somebody who can tolerate the black flies pretty well. But what happens with them is if they bite you like on your eyelid or your ear, they'll swell up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I've had my eyes swell up and shut, my ears. But when the fish are biting, man, I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. Well, isn't that why God made DEET?
That's true. And I do use DEET. We use a product here called Ben's. It's a bug spray, but they make one with 100% DEET. And I put that on my collars of like my wrist and my neck and stuff, but I don't put that on my direct skin. And some people do, but Yeah, that and cigars, they say, are the only two ways to fend them off. So
What about like a head net?
you can do a head net, Steve, but I don't know. I don't look at that as a very proud thing to be wearing.
Wouldn't be caught dead in a head net, huh?
Yeah,
Sometimes those things are worth $100.
they are. And I don't blame people. And often when I'm getting chewed up, I go, man, one of those would be nice right now. But
Right about now.
I just feel like the Mainer in me would be upset if I did not suck up the black flies.
I got you. You know, in Wisconsin, they've got black flies out there. I think that's what they are. But I found that out the hard way. We went out fishing a couple of years ago and just were getting swarmed by these bugs that you can't see, you know, and DEET did not work on them. And finally we bumped into some other anglers and were like, here, try this. And they handed me a bottle of this stuff called Buggins. And it's not DEET based. There's something else in it and it works great. It just doesn't last very long. You got to keep spraying it like every 2 hours.
Sure.
But that worked great. It totally saved the day. It didn't bother us at all once we had that stuff on.
Yeah, you're probably referring to no-see-ums, which are so small. You literally can't see them. And
That's what it is.
they, man, they bite you and they give you a little itch and stuff. And they're a hard one, actually, to get rid of. So I'll have to look at, it's called Buggins.
Buggins. Yeah, Buggins. Yeah, I'm not sure where they make it, but it worked really good. It was like vanilla based or something. Worked very well.
Very cool. Probably the last fish I want to talk about here in Maine that we have. I know we want to talk about landlocked salmon today, but
Sure.
we also do have a very small population of blue-back trout, which is basically a landlocked Arctic char. So if you've seen an Arctic char up in like Alaska,
Yeah.
these are smaller versions and they're not quite as colorful because I think the Arctic char up there gets some really deep reds and oranges. Ours are more silvery kind of, but they get a little bit of red on their tips and their belly and stuff. So
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, these Arctic char pop up in the strangest place. I was talking to somebody the other day about in Colorado who said there's a couple of systems that have Arctic char stocked in them out in Colorado. So you never know.
it's
You're
crazy.
going to bump into something. Yeah. Hey, you got a good moose story for us? Close encounter?
Ooh, man. I got some that are inappropriate due to the male body parts of the moose.
Okay.
But I think my toughest moose story was I almost hit one, and he literally I was going about 70 and a 55, which I don't know. I guess I shouldn't be saying on the air, but I was driving a little quick. I wanted to get up to the spot, so we saw a moose though, and I saw him out of the corner of my eye, and he was about a foot away from my passenger window. He was on a run straight out from the woods
Coming into the road.
coming into the road. Yeah. So our a lot of the roads are really tight. Like we have a lot of conifers in the state. So a lot of pine, a lot of alders, and it's super tight woods. And I have no idea how they navigate through those woods, but him and I locked eyes for a nanosecond. And I'll never forget, just his eyes were big. My eyes were probably big too.
Yeah.
And we just locked eyes really quick. And I mean, if I was a second later down the road, him and I were going to collide. And, it's a lot of people die with a rotting moose carcass on them.
Oh my gosh. That'll total your car, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I got kids. I have little girls now. And that was back when I was not married and kind of single. And so I go a lot slower these days.
Yeah, I'm with you. But I know the feeling like when you're late and you want to get to the stream, right? You might be missing
Man,
something.
I had the bite so bad back in my early days. I would get out of work at 2:00 and I would drive
God.
2.5 hours north
Yeah, fast.
to fish for like 4 hours, and then I'd come back home and get home at midnight, and that was just on a Tuesday,
And that was worth it. Completely.
worth it to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. We start mellowing when we get a little older, don't we?
Yeah, I don't do that anymore. No way.
Hey anglers, if you get excited about small stream fishing, then you need to know about JP Ross fly rods. If being outside nurtures your soul, if holding a fish of any size is like gold to you, if you believe that a fly rod should be a reflection of yourself and what you love, then you need to know about JP Ross fly rods. JP Ross produces many types of handmade fly rods, over 7,000 since 1997, but they are best known for their small stream collection and their passion for building relationships with their customers to help them be happy by being outside. I had a chance to fish one of these gems recently in Michigan and was blown away with its performance, beauty, and effortless casting. JP Ross himself was featured on my recent podcast on the Adirondacks, so check that out when you get a minute. And you can check out JP Ross Fly Rods at, you guessed it, jprossflyrods.com. Be sure to mention coupon code HAPPYFISH to receive $50 off any rod purchase. Like I always say, if you know how many fly rods you have, you don't have enough. So put a smile on your face and pick up a JP Ross Fly Rod before your next trip. Get outside and simply fish. All right, so I got a buddy who comes out every summer and visits some family in Rangeley, which is a town, right, in Maine. And
Yes.
he's been talking to me about landlocked salmon for years and how they just go nuts when they're hooked. And after reading up on them, because I've never fished for landlocked, so, full transparency, but I even read that sometimes these fish go airborne before your strike indicator moves. They're out of the water.
Yes.
And how would you describe the fight of a landlocked salmon?
So Maine is basically the only state that has landlocked salmon in abundance. I know New Hampshire has a wild population. I think parts of Massachusetts do too.
Yeah.
But other than that, you got to go north to Quebec and Labrador. So they're basically a smaller cousin of the Atlantic salmon.
Okay.
They're actually called Atlantic landlocked salmon. So like you alluded to, kind of like Atlantic salmon, they put on a big show for you with often multiple jumps, and they're known to spit a fly very easily. So hooking them is not always the hardest part, but landing them is. And the other cool part about them is that, they can be found in rivers that have anywhere from class 1 to class 5 rapids. So like you just said, your indicator doesn't even move by the time one of these things is hooked in, and they're jumping, and it's that quick, and they will go downstream on you, and then they'll come back upstream. And sometimes your line is still facing downstream and the fish is jumping 20 feet upstream. And that's because he bulldogged, he went to the bottom, found a log, wrapped around it, came back up. So
yeah,
they're not a fish that's easy to land. I wouldn't say they're as hard as Atlantics, because I think I've never fished for Atlantic salmon before, but I do believe it's very hard they're hard to hook into, first of all, but they're very hard to land. Like it can be, they say, up in like the Miramichi and stuff, up in Nova Scotia area, I think.
Sure.
I could be wrong with that. But they they might land 1 or 2 fish all week in camp, they say sometimes.
Really? That hard?
Yeah, they're hard. They just jump, man. And when they jump, if you got any slack in there, you can usually kiss it goodbye.
Oh my gosh. So how big do Atlantic salmon get? You were talking about maybe 18, 20 inches. Is that typical, or what's kind of typical?
So Atlantic salmon can get really big. They're the ones that are in Canada mostly. We don't have populations anymore. The Atlantic landlocked salmon, which we have, I think you're
landlocked salmon, I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. A good size one is a 17, 18, 19 inch, somewhere in that range.
Okay. You're
probably going to get them mostly in like the 14 to 16 inch range. They really, I think I'm pretty sure they live in streams and rivers for like the first 4 years of their life. Then they start to go to the lakes. So you may not get big ones all the time in rivers. I mean, I've caught them as small as 6 to 8 inches, but I've also caught them over 20 inches, and I've seen them up to 30 inches before. So
really,
those are big fish. And we can talk now, but they forage on rainbow smelt. Have you ever seen rainbow smelt before?
No, I haven't. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So like I was saying, the young salmon, they spend about 4 years in the rivers or streams before they move to lakes. And that's when they become dependent on bait fish like our rainbow smelt. So rainbow smelt range anywhere from like 2 to 6 inches, I think. And if you ever go out with somebody on a lake and people like to troll, you'll see in their fish finders, you'll see these big, just massive balls, and they basically just travel around the lakes as big bait balls, kind of like in the ocean. So. And landlocked salmon love to feed on them, and they love to chase them in the spring into the rivers when they're spawning. So the rainbow smelt spawn in the springtime. So you can pull some of those big lake salmon out basically. And then a lot of them will stay for a little bit, and then they retreat back to the lake when the rivers warm up too much for them. So
okay, so you're finding landlocked salmon are in lakes and rivers. I mean, do they usually like spend their summers in the lakes and they come up in the spring chasing these smelt maybe the fall to spawn, or what's their
Yeah,
habitat?
they spawn in the fall. So they'll leave the rivers sometimes. It really depends on temperature. So if the temperatures are getting in the 70s for them, a lot of times they'll retreat back to the lakes and kind of stay in deep places and until they're ready to spawn in the fall. And that's when they come back into our rivers. So, most fly fishermen are fishing for them in rivers. We do have them in ponds, but not in great numbers. And if you're fishing for them in lakes, you're usually trolling for them.
Oh, I see. They're down deep chasing those smelt.
Yeah, and just a little history on them. Landlocked salmon were originally found in 4 main lake systems. So they were found in I memorized this earlier because I want to remember because it was one of them I didn't know. So they're in Sebago Lake, which is a huge lake down around Portland, which is our biggest city, and that's southern Maine's freshwater drinking source, basically. They're in Green Lake, Sebec Lake, and then Grand Lake. I also was told, and I've also read that they're found in Lake Champlain and Lake Ontario watersheds.
Okay.
I do not believe they're in Lake Ontario anymore, though, due to years of dams and pollution. And
yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah, so unfortunately, dams are a killer. We know that, and I think we have like 175 lakes and like 50 rivers that are listed as prime landlocked fisheries.
That's great.
But I think only about 50 of those are supported by natural reproduction, meaning they're not stocked.
Okay. So, and how widespread over the state of Maine is the distribution, would you say, of these landlocks now?
I believe you can find them in every county, and we have 16 counties here in Maine. And most of the stuff on the coast or in southern Maine are stocked, with the exception of a place like Sebago Lake. So Sebago Lake, actually, the scientific term for landlocked salmon is Salmo salar Sebago. So Sebago Lake is our most popular lake. It's a place where a lot of people from states in New England come there, and they summer there and they winter there. It's a great place, like 30 minutes from Portland, which is our biggest city.
Yeah.
Of those 4 lakes I mentioned, Sebago is by far the most popular. And it probably has the saddest story when it comes to salmon, though. So back in the 1970s, our state inland fishery and wildlife department, they dumped in a lot of lake trout, I believe from New York.
Oh, geez.
To help provide anglers basically with another opportunity, which we know today that's usually a bad idea.
No, lake trout eat a lot of game fish, don't they?
They do, and what has happened since then basically has just been a dramatic decline in the salmon population due to that increased competition for food from the lake trout. And it's just sad because the population is, it's not non-existent, but a lot of anglers will tell you, that, they know where these fish spawn in the fall, and it's just a ghost town compared to what it was even just 10, 15 years ago.
That's too bad. Well, luckily you've got 150 other lakes and rivers to fish in, right?
we do, but for people like, I do live near Portland in southern Maine, so I got to travel far if I want to catch these fish, especially wild ones.
Okay. All right. So you were, before the show, I always talk to my guests ahead of time, and I like to ask them, what would you be excited to talk about? Which river system? And you said pretty quickly, the West Branch or the Penobscot, because I think you said it's your best shot for a trophy landlocked salmon. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the Penobscot and why that is.
Yeah. So the West Branch of the Penobscot comes out of Chamberlain Lake and Telos Lake, and it has a big dam called the Ripigenus Dam. And the West Branch is actually very popular for whitewater rafting.
Okay.
But coincidentally, with them releasing every day for the rafters, it keeps the temperatures down, the oxygen levels high. So landlocked salmon have been thriving in that river for many years. It's a river that is, it has powerful rapids. Like, it has class 5 rapids, which is the highest you can get. But it also has a lot of great, long riffles and runs. So, while you have all that whitewater and stuff, you can find places to target these fish where you're not in danger of wading. And, it's definitely a river that, stays cold enough throughout the season that you can target them all season, but it's hard to get up there in the early spring just because the roads are horrible. It's all dirt logging roads.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, Aaron, is kind of break down the river system. Like, how does it change from top to bottom? Like, what's it like at the top? And then where would you point anglers for the, the best sections? Probably away from class 5 rapids, I would say.
No, so the river, like I said, starts at Ripagenus Dam, and for about the next 10 or 11 miles, that's your best shot at hooking in the salmonids, brook trout and landlocked salmon.
Right below the dam, then.
Yeah, below the dam.
Okay.
And that's how pretty much all of our big rivers, like I mentioned, the Kennebec before and the Androscoggin, they all offer trout and salmon opportunities at the headwaters. But after a while, they all run into a series of dams. And, dams, as we know, they create an impoundment, which warms the water up even more. And then below those dams, forget it. The waters are just getting way too high, 70s, 80s for trout and salmon. Coincidentally, though, it makes for a great smallmouth and pike fishery.
I'll bet.
So that's great. And all those rivers, they run out to the ocean. But like I said, they have multiple dams on them. So, your best bet for landlocked salmon on a river like the Penobscot is the first 10 miles or so. I think for maybe the first mile and a half. So you have the dam, and then you have McKay Station, which is where all the rafters put in. And from McKay Station down to a spot called Big Eddy. So the Big Eddy is a giant eddy that's basically about 100 yards wide. We all know what an eddy is, right? It's just kind of a rotating pool. And this is a huge eddy, and there's a big campground there. And the campground's kind of the heart of the West Branch. It's a place where most people stay when they're up there.
Okay.
And it's where there's a lot of fishing opportunities around there. So between McKay Station and the Big Eddy, you have most of your whitewater, your heaviest whitewater. So there are wading opportunities in that section, but it's very hard to get in a drift boat or a raft. You have to be an extremely well-versed rafting guide or whatever, raft driver, whatever you want to call them, to be able to navigate that section. So that whole stretch from McKay Station down to Big Eddy, it's cool, man. It's got gorges in it. It's got a ton of whitewater. It looks very intimidating it is. But that section, actually, in the Maine law book, you're not allowed to take a salmon under 26 inches from that section.
Wow.
So that tells you there's big fish there. It also tells you that they're trying to keep some of the smaller fish there, which are the breeders, and
sure.
And but I'll tell you, a cool thing about a place like the West Branch is it's all artificial lures only, but you're going to find mainly fly fishermen there. And we all know that most fly fishermen are not put and take type people. They're catch and release. So you have a great population up there. I don't always love talking about spots and all that stuff, just because even with all the water we have here in Maine, we still have such limited opportunities for trout and salmon because we just have these headwaters where the fishing is still good. And then you have, 50, 60 miles down to the coast where the water's just too warm.
Right. Good to know. And you're saying people are wading this, not floating this.
Yeah. So from that section, McKay Station down to the Big Eddy, definitely wade. It's a spot you want to wade. It's a huge freestone river. So not like a gravel bottom type river, a lot of big rocks. So when you're wading, you can be up to your knees, and then you take one step and you can be over your head.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very treacherous in a lot of parts up there. And but it's also a fantastic stretch to hit pocket water.
Yeah.
And you don't have any, everybody thinks of fly fishing as delicate, and you have these big long slow pools and these big long slicks and stuff, and it's not the case, man. You got whitewater everywhere.
Don't landlocked salmon prefer faster water like that?
They do. I mean, it's more oxygenated, and they don't you won't find them in places where there's basically there's no river flow. They need to be in well oxygenated water. Their food sources are there. I mean, you get those freestone streams like that, and you get a lot of stoneflies and caddis, which are their main diet.
Oh, interesting.
From Big Eddy down for about 5 miles or so, you can float that in a drift boat or in a raft. So a lot of guides who work up there, and let me be clear, I do not guide the West Branch. I don't guide that section because it's so far from my house. Like, it's 4.5 hours away from my house.
Okay.
But I will tell you, it's a place where I go every summer as a reprieve. I kind of block off a chunk of time to go there and just fish myself with a group of people I like to fish with. And it's always been my getaway. Let's put it that way.
That's nice. Hey, what's your best fish story from up that way, Aaron?
So I have a great fish story. There's a section of river where it's very popular, and it only fits one angler, maybe two if you know each other. But it's one of those spots where like one guy can be there, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm sitting and I'm watching this guy, and you know, he's getting into some smaller fish, he's missing fish, and then just kind of slows down. And he saw me sitting there and he said, "Hey, I'm not doing so hot. Why don't you come in here?" And I said, "Oh, no, you're here." I said, "I got all day." And he's like, No, I insist, come in. And he was an older guy. And so he went back and sat on the rocks, and I made my way out there. And my second cast, Steve, I hooked into the biggest fish that I've ever seen in terms of landlocked salmon. And the guy, I mean, it was like you said earlier, the minute it took a fly, so it was, I believe it was just an elk hair caddis, nothing special.
Yeah.
And took the fly and immediately jumped. And when it came down, it was just like a pile of rocks. You know, it was like a small child, like a small child. It was just a huge, right?
Yeah.
And he yells out at me. He says, "Oh, mama." He says, "Hold on, son." He goes, "I haven't seen one that big in years." You know, he yells out.
That's awesome.
So I got the fish on. I'm just jacked. I mean, everybody knows what it's like when you get a huge fish on. You can't think. Everything's crazy. I'm letting him run. I'm pulling him back in. I'm letting him run. I'm pulling him back in. And I proceed to see my line. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, I was kind of playing off this story. I see my line about 20 feet downstream of me at a 45-degree angle. And then the guy and I both see the fish jump about 30 feet upstream of me.
What happened there?
He yells out, he goes, "That's not good." And he was right, because my line snapped off. He had, from my thought, either gone around a huge rock or around a log and just got me and broke off. So
that's too bad.
Yeah. And this gentleman, kind of to add on to the story a little bit, he's very popular up at the campground. So this campground has cabins. It has RV sites for people that kind of stay for the season. And then it has a lot of tent sites across the river. And this gentleman is a seasonal camper up there, or seasonal angler, and he stays in his RV. But every night at dinner time, he goes out on the front lawn and plays the bagpipes.
Oh, nice.
So, you know, you'll be having dinner, or you'll be fishing, and you just hear bagpipes every night. And this is the same guy. And like, that's
awesome.
Small world. His son is now my chiropractor.
Did you tell him this story?
Yeah, it's a great story. Just the "Oh, mama, hold on, son." You know,
"Oh, mama."
Classic.
Is he Scottish? He's got a Scottish accent or something?
Oh yeah. He's his last name starts with Mick.
Okay, right off the boat. Oh, that's great.
Yep.
Well, that's cool. I wanted to ask you real quick, because I want to get into your story a little bit. But you say the river's huge. Like, what are the flows? Like, how far across is it? That kind of thing.
On average, it's probably 50, 60 yards across.
Okay, good size.
Not a river you're crossing at all in any spot. Not only because of the power, but there's some deeper stretches. And I mean, we have very tannic water here in New England, especially in Maine. And tannic water is very hard to see into. So we're not sight fishing for these things. You know, we're not, it's not like that. You're fishing. What I tell a lot of people when they fish rivers like that are so wide across, Steve, is I say, what you got to do is you got to look at it, and you got to break it down into mini streams, basically, or mini rivers.
Okay. It's a great tip.
You know, you're looking for pocket water. You're looking for these kind of 10, 15, 20 foot stretches in behind rocks that are holding. But, you know, as we all know with that, when you have so many different currents going across, things like mending are super important, or having a 10-foot rod super important, or high sticking. You know, and my biggest piece of advice for people when they fish a river like the West Branch is don't stay in one place for too long.
Okay.
The best thing you can do is move, just constantly moving. You know, I call it knocking on doors. You know, you knock on a door, see if somebody's home. If they're not there, you can stay there and switch patterns if you really feel good about a spot. But if they're not, move on to the next pocket, you know, move on to the next run.
That's a great tip. Does it get super crowded with that big campground up there, or are you guys remote enough where maybe the crowds aren't too bad?
Yeah. So it's not, you're 45 minutes up the road from the closest town, which is called Millinocket. And Millinocket is very popular because it's an old mill town, but it's also it's the entryway to Baxter State Park. So Baxter State Park is a little bit southeast of the West Branch, and that holds our jewel, Mount Katahdin, as I was speaking about earlier. And it's about 200,000 acres in Baxter State Park. Beautiful land, it's all state park land, so it's a lot of backcountry ponds that have salmon and brook trout in them. Just a fantastic place. But you're about 45 minutes away from any town when you're up there. So if you're up there, you're most likely camping, So a lot of people stay at the campground and the Big Eddy campground. There's another campground a little south of there down by what's called A-Ball. So A-B-O-L, A-Ball Bridge. And that's where most of the rafters stay, though. So you kind of got a competition up there for anglers and rafters in terms of where to stay because it's pretty limited.
Yeah.
But with that being said, it's still a very popular spot, and it can get crowded from time to time. And I often wonder, where the heck are all these people staying? Campground's only so big. It probably only has, maybe 30, 40 tent sites.
Oh, no kidding. And there's more than that fishing, huh?
Yeah, they're just there, and a very Maine's a funny state in terms of fly fishing. I wanted to mention this. I was thinking about this the other day when I was thinking about our interview here, and I wanted to mention that, Maine is not a place where you're going to see people in Sims waders and in, really fancy gear that we all, fly fishermen love to get fancy gear. We love to buy stuff, don't we?
Yeah.
But Maine is a place where you're going to have a lot of your fly fishermen are guys who sleep in their trucks, right in the cab, just to be the first one on the water. They often have a spin rod in the back and a fly rod in the back, and they're well versed at both.
Yeah.
They probably got leaky waders from 25 years ago that they're just too stubborn to go and buy new ones. And that to me is that's the main fly fisherman. I mean, those are the guys that you see out there a lot. And I just love it. It's just, Maine's it's a country state. It's cool.
Yeah, that's great. I think I might have fit right in there until I finally replaced my leaky waders about 2 years ago. I did break down and buy a nice pair of Sims waders because I was tired of fishing in the winter. And, if your waders leak and the water's 38 degrees, you get cold in a hurry.
Oh, yes. That's a problem here. So it's a really cool thing about kind of the Maine people. And
that is neat.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Maine people, you're one of them, right? You're a school teacher by trade. How did you end up as a fly fishing guide?
So originally, I actually wasn't a teacher. I went to school. You mentioned earlier at St. Joseph's College, which is on Sebago Lake. It's a very small school, like 1,000 kids, tiny school. And I went to school for finance, and I worked a couple years in commercial banking. And as you can probably tell from me talking, I'm a guy who likes to talk. I'm a guy who likes to tell stories.
You're a born podcaster.
Yeah, I'm a podcaster for that reason too, right? So people, some people are built for that job. I'm not. I can't sit in a cubicle all day and not talk to anybody. It was kind of driving me nuts. So I went back to school to be a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher, and I loved coaching kids. So I did a lot of coaching in college as kind of volunteer.
Nice. With
some youth football and some youth basketball in the area. So it was pretty cool to kind of take that and just be like, you know what, I'm going to make this a career. So went back to school to be a teacher. And literally my first year as a teacher, a friend of mine now and fellow guide was across the hall. And we were both talking about how we didn't really enjoy our summer jobs. He was a driving instructor. And I was working for a carpenter in the summers and basically just painting, outdoor painting, which, as you and I know, is not fun. I mean, painting outdoors is not a really great job.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So we were kind of got talking, and we were just messing around one day and saying, man, wouldn't it be so cool to take people fishing? I mean, you and I both love to fish, and we're kind of like, well, why can't we do it? So we looked into some more, and we decided to sign up and take the Maine guide test. The Maine guide test is the most rigorous test in the country.
Huh, no kidding.
A lot of states don't even have a guide test. I believe a lot of states, you kind of go through outfitters, and outfitters kind of vouch for you type deal. In Maine, though, you have to pass a verbal test, a written test with 100 questions on it. You have to do map and compass in a very short of time. And you sit in front of a board of retired wardens and retired Maine guides. So they throw at you some scenarios, like a lost person scenario or a catastrophic event scenario. and it can be rigorous. And a lot of people fail it the first time around, but we both passed, which was great. I actually did fail my first time. I failed at the map and compass part. I didn't know the difference between an inlet and outlet of a pond, and I do now. I can tell you that on a map. So yeah, we kind of decided with that, and then from there, I figured out, oh my God, I can make in a day what I'm making a week working for a carpenter, right? So not that you'll ever find a fishing guide who's a millionaire, because you have a very limited season.
Yeah, right.
And you can only charge so much. It's not a job, especially in a place like Maine, where you can really make a living off of it, because as a full-time job, because basically our season really runs from kind of mid-May through mid-October. So, you go to places out west, they're already running in February and March,
They are.
They go through November. So, they just have a little longer season. And we, winter fishing here, winter fly fishing in Maine is not great, because we just have ice everywhere, so.
Yeah, you can't get it to fish. Sure.
You just can't get at them. Yeah, they're really in the wintertime just in the coastal rivers, because those have, salt water going into them, so they don't ice over. But
yeah. Now you got excited about fishing. I think you were telling me with took a trip up north with your uncle. Is that right?
Yeah. So in speaking about the West Branch, when I wasn't raised fishing. My dad didn't fish. I didn't have. I'm an only child. No siblings that fished or anything. So when I was in high school, my uncle asked me if I wanted to go fishing with him at this pond nearby, and it was spin fishing, and we went for bass, which most people cut their teeth on. And I loved it. I just fell in love with it. It was great. It was just fun. It was just different for me. I was a big sports guy, and it was just cool to kind of do something different. So for my 18th birthday and my graduation gift, he rented a cabin up by the West Branch, and he brought with him a fly rod, and he had no idea how to use it. He didn't know what was going on. We had spin gear with us. We were, if I remember correctly, we were standing in the river with jeans on, with no shirts on, and didn't know what waders were, didn't know what tippet was.
You look like a Maine fisherman.
Yeah, we didn't know. So, but I remember standing in the river and seeing two bald eagles flying overhead. And I just thought, this is so cool, man. And I want to get to know more about this.
That's great. Did your uncle realize what an impression he made on you?
At the time, no, but today, yes. He's my story, and he's not a huge fly fisherman, even to this day. He likes to go, but I would call him after 20 years, still kind of a beginner. So
yeah, no kidding.
But just bringing me there, like, that's how cool, Steve, this spot is to me. Or how cool Maine is in these spots that we have, because just being there made me curious to want to learn more about it. And
yeah, you fell in love with it. And, take a kid fishing, right? Find a kid who's never been, and you never know, you might light a fire under them and give them something.
It's such an understatement, Steve. I mean, you literally bring a kid one time and you have no idea if that could, metastasize into something huge for them.
It might be the greatest thing that they enjoy all the rest of their life. And I know you do a lot of volunteering and working with kids. Tell us just for a minute or two about that.
Yeah, so I'm affiliated with a fly shop here in southern Maine called Eldridge Brothers Fly Shop. And in the wintertime, I volunteer down there and do some beginner fly tying classes. And they do a ton of fly tying classes there in the winter, because literally we can't really fish here. So it's what we do as fly fishermen. We tie, we talk about tying. It's what you do in the wintertime. So they run a big spring expo in the spring, and they raffle off thousands of flies that people donate. And with that money, they buy Wapsie brand fly tying kits, and they just give them out to kids. So if you come in the shop and you got your son with you, or, you know about the program, whatever, Jim, who runs the shop, he'll hand you a kit. Say, here you go. Just take it, bring it to him. So
how cool is that?
It's great. So with me working in a school, a few years back, we started having an enrichment day where, teachers kind of were able to bring their skill sets out, take kids skiing, take kids sledding, take kids ice fishing. And my thing was fly tying. So I got a bunch of kids to sign up, and I had like 8 kids, I think, and every kid got to leave there with, $100 fly tying kit that day.
Nice. That'll get them going.
Which was cool. So, those kids have since gone to high school. I haven't seen them. but who knows, and who knows when they go to pull that kit back out when they get older and go, hey, what's this thing about again?
A couple of years ago, when I was in 8th grade, one of my dad's friends came over to our house. Me and my friend Billy were trying to figure out how to tie flies, and this guy came over and gave us a lesson. And I called him. We're talking, 50 years later, 55 years later, I called the guy because I was 14 at the time and told him how much it meant to me and thanked him. And he was so touched. He just passed away last year, as a matter of fact. He was in his 80s. But I was so glad I did that, just circle back around and let the guy know, man, you really made a big difference in my life.
Yeah. And literally just as small a thing as taking you fishing one time. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
like for you and I and people who fish, they're on the water 80, 100, 120 days a year, whatever, like spending one day with a kid and you could change their life. I mean, that's a really easy way to make a very strong impact on a youth's life.
You bet. Well, and adults too. I get a lot of adults in the fly fishing. I take a group, big group fishing every year from my church, and get so many new people that are like, yeah, this is really cool. I'm going to stick with this. So, all right. Well, hey, shift gears for a minute. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah. So we're jumping all over the place here. But,
yeah.
So like your podcast, which I stumbled upon last kind of fall, I was listening to a lot of fishing podcasts because I'm in the car driving to work a lot or whatever. And, I found that a lot of them, like you got the Orvis podcast, you got other podcasts out there, they kind of just all talk about the same stuff, like techniques, tips, gear, how to fish, streamers, how to fish dry flies. And I'm like, I'm pretty adept at that stuff. And I don't really want to like listen to this stuff. I kind of wanted to hear stuff that was more central to literally Maine and like where I lived, because there was not a lot of content out there about Maine. And, they call Montana the last best place, right?
Sure.
And I've been to Montana. I love Montana. I love to refer to Montana a lot when it comes to fly fishing. I think everybody does. It's the Mecca. So I think Maine is kind of the last best hidden gem in terms of the fly fishing world. And there's just not a lot of content out there about it. So I kind of thought to myself, hey, what if I just start a podcast and try to get people on who are living in Maine, working in Maine in the fly fishing industry to help kind of promote them, and I have my guide business. So for me, there was kind of a little incentive there to, get my name out there a little more. And I'll tell you, Steve, the minute I started asking people who have, fly rod company here or fly tie, we have a lot of custom fly tires here or other guides, they're like, yeah, I'm in, let's do it. So, you listen to my show, which is called the Maine Fly Fishing Podcast, very simply. It's a conversational show. We just kind of get on and we talk fishing. But my main goal was to educate people more about the fisheries in Maine, the type of fish we have here, how to handle fish, just kind of educating and talking about conservation. But at the same time, I thought it was really important to pull in people who are doing really cool things with fly fishing here in Maine and to help promote them and get them known.
That's great.
And because of that, Steve, I've met some people who I believe are going to be lifelong friends for me. And I didn't know a lot of people who are kind of on my level of fly fishing. Not that I'm above a lot of people, but I just didn't know those people,
Yeah.
And now I know people who are on the water more than me, or they fly tie way more than me. And they're just like, you get into fly fishing, you get obsessed with it. And it's cool to meet other people who are on your level.
Yeah. And you get in awe of some, the talents of some people and the knowledge of some people. Like we just interviewed Joe Humphreys.
Oh my gosh.
Back in April, right? And just what he knows, I barely scratched the surface with him over 2 shows, right? It's just in awe of what some people have absorbed through the years. Well, that's great. And your show is a really good show too. I've enjoyed listening to it.
Thank you.
I'm glad we could connect today. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's go back to the West Branch. So can you give us a rundown of the seasons on the West Branch? So, what are you starting with? It sounds like maybe smelt. And then what is it, kind of what do you work into from there?
Yeah, sure. So we have something in Maine, and I'm sure a lot of other northern states do, but we have something called ice out here. And ice out for us is just basically the lakes, when they lose all their ice, they usually open up the dams, or it creates a lot of natural runoff. And we have like a 2-week runoff period, usually, maybe 3.
Okay.
And that often, all depends on rainfall amounts. It depends on snowfall, how much is coming off the mountains too. But we have ice out, and when ice out it happens, when the ice leaves, it kind of triggers the smelt, which are basically our big forage fish here.
Yeah.
It triggers them to go spawn in the rivers. And when that happens, it's all pretty much temperature based, but that brings a lot of these brook trout, landlocked salmon out of the lakes and out of the, kind of not estuaries, but kind of the mouths of the rivers, and brings them up the rivers. So the smelt love to spawn at nighttime, and they're in a lot of the tributaries here. And they're a fish that not only fish love, but people love them too. So a lot of people they dip for smelts, because they'll end up using them for bait basically throughout the season. And some people eat them too. But when you have ice out, the fish leave, and all they got in their mind at first when they come to those rivers, for the most part, is they are focused on smelt. And as the water temperatures get a little higher, and I'm talking like, it's like 38 degrees water, you know what I mean? It's not,
oh man.
Yeah, it's cold. And, that's usually early May, and you're not going to move a lot of fish. And to be very honest with you, it's hard to even get up to a place like the West Branch in early May because of just mud, mud on the roads and washouts and stuff. But if you get up there and you fish patterns like, black ghost, or you fish patterns like, we have a pattern here called the Magog smelt. You fish patterns like floating smelt patterns even. You can expect to potentially catch the biggest salmon in your life. So
that's awesome. Hey, could we post some pictures of your top fly patterns on our Facebook and Instagram page? Would you be cool with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that'd be great.
I was just going to say, we basically refer to that here as the smelt hatch,
Yeah.
And
there you go.
Once they leave, you're now talking late May, kind of Memorial Day-ish. Sometimes a little earlier than that, sometimes a little later. But once they leave, a lot of those fish hang around because we have excellent numbers of caddis and stoneflies.
Yeah, I've heard.
But I would say it's like 80% caddis. So, out west you have your big mayfly hatches, you got your big stoneflies. Here in Maine, caddis is the king, we call it. We get caddis hatches like they get mayfly hatches out in the Midwest,
Kind of epic proportions, huh?
Yeah, and salmon just love caddis. They won't start hatching until about mid-June, so you don't really have any dry fly opportunities until then. But between caddis larva nymphs and stonefly nymphs, that's what they'll start. That's kind of their next big meal they'll start eating after smelt. So
okay,
that's a really fun time to be a good, nymph fisherman, and to be skilled at doing that, because they're eating big bugs on the bottom of that time. And your water temps early June are rolling into the mid 40s. And then once you get up to around 50, you'll start getting your hatches.
Wow. It's cold.
So, mid-June, you start to get your first big caddis hatches on the West Branch. But the cool thing about the caddis hatches is they pretty much run right through the summer.
Oh, nice.
And they're like not predictable, but it's pretty much nightly, right around dusk. And they're crazy. Like when I go up there, so I usually go up there in July, but when you're up there fishing and you want to eat dinner, you got two choices, because you want to be on the water for dusk. You want to be on the water from 6 to 9 or 6 to 9:30 or whatever. You can either eat dinner at 10 o'clock at night, or you can eat dinner at 4:30. I prefer to eat my dinner at 4:30, because if you're cooking after you get off the river, you're going to get a mouthful of caddis with whatever food you're cooking.
Is that right?
Oh, it's just ridiculous. So they're attracted to light too. So if you're cooking with a headlamp on, you can have macaroni and cheese and caddis.
That sounds good. So what size are those caddis in the stoneflies, and what patterns do you like for them?
Sure. So the caddis, they kind of start off bigger, and then they kind of work their way down as the season moves. Usually nothing bigger than a size 12. Might run a size 10 here and there, just to be able to see it or get a little more buoyancy, especially if you're fishing some spots that have some rough water. I like to fish green bodied, like olive green. I like tan, and I like black. Those are kind of my three colors. They kind of color all the spectrums.
And how do you decide when to go green or black, tan, or olive? What's going on where you switch it up?
I usually start with green early in the season, just because a lot of the caddis larvae you're seeing still got that green, that kind of sometimes olive, but sometimes really bright green to them too, like almost like a chartreuse.
Sure.
So I like to start, and then I move to dark ones. I don't really know why, Steve, but I just do, and I seem to have more luck with them.
Just works, man. That's why.
Yeah, and then throughout the summer, I've been told, I've always wondered about mayfly and caddis hatches, and I've been told by some people that as the summer goes on, the trees actually get lighter, like the bark. So that's why the bugs will lighten up in color. I don't know if I really believe that or not, but maybe for camouflage purposes, they do that. So I fish a lot of tan bodied after that, and I'll scale down to size 18 by mid-July most of the time. So
really,
yeah.
And what about stoneflies? Are you really paying attention to them?
Yeah, so our stonefly hatches they're quick. They're going to feed on the nymphs a lot in early June, mid-June, maybe late June. And then you're going to get like a 2 to 3 week stretch of stonefly hatches. So mostly like yellow golden stones.
Okay.
Very similar to what you see out west, very similar looking to like a salmon fly, or just they have golden stones out there out west too. So
sure. Yeah.
We'll get that for like 2 to 3 weeks, but a lot of stoneflies, kind of like I actually heard, and you reminded me of this with your podcast with Joe Humphreys. He talked about they hatch at nighttime. So a lot of fish at dawn, early in the morning are kind of playing cleanup on those. So the best times to catch a stonefly hatch is early morning.
No kidding. Okay. What size are those?
I'll run anywhere from a size 6 to a size 10 usually.
Okay. Good size then.
Yeah. And I like, a lot of people don't fish them here, but I like patterns like chubby Chernobyls, which are crazy popular out west and not as popular here, but I like stimulators are great patterns they're kind of like a caddis stonefly mix. You can kind of hit both of that. That's a great fly.
Yeah.
It's an elk hair fly, very much like an elk hair caddis, just a little bigger. We do get mayfly hatches, but not in the numbers or proportions that you see out in Montana, or you even see there in the Midwest. We don't get those mayfly hatches, and we start off the season with Hendricksons around Memorial Day.
Okay, sure.
And then we kind of work into like your Quill Gordon type patterns or your March Brown type patterns. And then our drakes come like mid to late June. And our ponds, but not our rivers, our ponds get fantastic green drake hatches. And we also get hexagenia hatches too. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah, those are fun.
Yeah. I mean, those hexes are, I don't know how to describe them. They're like 4 inches long. I mean, they're just huge.
They're like the monkeys on the Wizard of Oz. They're picking Dorothy up and carrying her off, right?
Yes. Yeah. They're just massive. We don't get that on the river though, but we do get a lot of it on, like I said, our ponds and some of our lakes. But it's very funny in Maine. You get like select ponds that get a green drake hatch every year, and a pond like 2 miles south of it or 2 miles east of it won't get them at all.
Isn't that interesting? What about, so August, you kind of take the month of August off because it just gets too warm for them?
Yeah, and just to finish out July, I like to fish a stonefly that we get here, and we call it the yellow Sally.
Sure, yeah.
You're familiar with the yellow Sally?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do get that hatch on the West Branch, which is very popular, and it's just basically a really bony little stonefly. But that's another hatch that we get that's great. And in August, I personally take the month of August off for the most part because from trout and salmon fishing, because our water temperatures just reach high 60s, low 70s, high 70s in some places. So it's really a message I've been trying to kind of spread with my podcast as well, because I don't personally think the state does a good enough job doing that. They don't want to discourage people from fishing. They make revenue off it. I get it. But, putting a fish back when it's 70 degrees, most of the time, if you've taken it out of the water, you've played it hard, it's not going to make it.
You've killed it.
Yeah. So for me, August is a month you could still fish up there. But, when I fish for trout and salmon in August, I'll go like the day after a rainstorm, when the water's cooled down or something. I just like to.
Yeah, great idea.
I feel bad about it. I've killed fish on accident and I've learned from it, and I hate it because I know that our numbers are not huge, plentiful, bountiful. We don't have thousands of fish per square mile and stuff. So
gotta watch it.
Yeah, I like during that month to turn my attention to smallmouth bass or to stripers.
Yeah, why not? from there, okay, after the hot months, then you head into the fall. What happens then?
Yeah, so here in Maine, our rivers, actually a lot of our waters, they run from April 1st to September 30th, and they close down. And they close down because spawning happens. A lot of states you can continue to fish right through the spawn, but Maine has always been very good about shutting it down around that time. So September's a cool month because you start getting those cooler mornings, cooler nights, and we get a really great, like we call it an October caddis. It's kind of like an orange caddis.
Oh yeah, yeah, they've got those out west too. Yeah.
You can still fish those. That's a hot color for me in September. You can fish those a lot right through the end of the month, usually, as long as, water temps they're usually staying in the mid 50s, low 60s at that point still. So, but after that, the salmon, they start to spawn, but they're not like brook trout. Like brook trout kind of spawn like literally the same week every year, it seems like.
Huh.
But salmon can be all over the place. And once they start spawning, they get really selective. And a lot of people like to throw big streamers in their face, or very bright streamers, yellows, reds, oranges, because they get kind of territorial like brown trout.
Sure.
As September ends, streamer fishing is very popular for them. I personally have a lot of luck fishing blueing olives, which we get a nice fall hatch here of.
Oh, nice.
That's kind of a secret. If I was going to reveal one secret today, that's my one secret.
Is that right? Don't forget the blue wing olives in the fall, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's and that kind of rounds out your season there, and they'll head back to the lakes after they spawn, and they're back chasing smelts for the winter.
So if you could name off, I know it varies by the season, but if you had like your top confidence flies in your vest with you, what would they be?
Oh man, I have a hard time sharing this stuff, Steve.
Oh man, here we go. We can pass on this one if we need to.
I can either be an honest guy, or I can lie, or I can say whatever. But I'm a pretty straight shooter. I like an abundance of either elk hair caddis patterns or Goddard caddis. They just float so well. I need something that's going to float that's getting hit by these big waves from the rapids and the water.
I see.
These types of. You can't be fishing a dainty little mayfly. It's just going to drown, no matter how much gink you put on it or Fliagra or whatever you're using. It's gonna get knocked down. So I would say that, and then chubby Chernobyl, definitely another one for me.
You mentioned that, yeah.
Subsurface, I like a lot of your typical nymphs. Caddis larva, pheasant tails. I like to fish a lot of jig patterns.
Okay.
Just because they don't get hung up as much on the bottom.
Yeah. Okay.
I like to fish stimulators. I like to fish chubby Chernobyls, like I mentioned, and everybody that I know are huge. Everybody's a big nymph fisherman these days, right? Because it's the easiest way to get into a lot of fish if you're good at it. But I'm like a dry fly nut. I like just that take of a dry fly is still the most exciting part of fly fishing for me.
I'm with you.
So I fish a lot of dries when people aren't. And, my success can go up and down, but oftentimes it's better than you would think, which is pretty cool.
Well, let me ask you this. When you're taking clients who are, let's say somebody who's pretty good trout fisherman and they're coming landlocked salmon fishing for the first time, like what's the conversation you're having with them to get them dialed into, like what's different about this? What are you telling them first thing in the morning?
I mean, the first thing I tell them is you're going to lose some fish today. That's the honest truth. And when it happens, right around 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. or whatever, I'm like, see, I told you.
Yeah, son of a gun. He's right.
A lot of our stuff here is barbless. The West Branch is not a barbless spot, but a lot of the rivers where I actually guide people over in the Rangeley region are barbless. So I don't think a barbless hook is a great argument. This is the chicken or the egg argument, but I don't think it makes it less likely for you to hook into a fish. But I do think it makes them less likely when they're jumping and going around logs and stuff just to come off. I mean, you get a size 18 or 20-inch fly on there, the size of your pinky fingernail. I mean, even with a barb, you're like, how the heck is this thing staying in his mouth?
Yeah, exactly. So what is your advice to people who are trying to land a landlock? What are the couple things you got to do? For
sure. I don't look for there's a lot of, on rivers like the West Branch, there's a lot of like popular runs, and you see popular runs, you'll see a lot of people there, but I love to hit pocket water, and I like to try with dries first. And then I like to go in with a nymph rod after. I always carry at least 2 rods with me, sometimes 3. Like I alluded to before, you can get some of your biggest ones early in the season on smelt, but let's be honest, most people are coming here when the weather's a lot nicer and you're not standing in 38-degree water. So, I like to fish a lot of pocket water, and I like to move a lot. So I tell people, listen, we're putting the miles on today. We're probably going to cover at least 2 miles. So I got to make sure people are in good shape. I do a lot of river crossings. Where I fish in Rangeley, we also have landlocked salmon, and they also can get pretty big. Like, I've had plenty of clients land some in the, low 20-inch region. So
yeah,
they're there. And one thing that I will say, if you're looking to target a salmon versus a brook trout, this isn't always the case, but if you're fishing June, July, skittering caddis on top can drive them nuts. And if you want to get them on dry flies, they don't care about drag and stuff when it comes to caddis. So for me, when people are not really listening well, or they're forgetting to, every guide says, mend it. So
yeah.
When they're not doing that stuff, sometimes just a caddis with a lot of movement on top can get them into a fish.
So maybe a not so great mender can actually catch some or at least hook some landlocked salmon, huh?
If you have a poor presentation, go fish with some like elk hair caddis in those months.
You'll do fine.
And if there is salmon around, you'll find them.
All right. So back to my question: how do you land these things? Like, no slack. What other tips do you have for getting these things in the net?
Yeah. So just to kind of share fish stories with you a little bit, a lot of these rivers I've alluded to have a lot of white water on them. So if you're in a pocket, right, and that fish goes downstream on you through some white water, you're not getting that fish back up the white water. Okay. It's not happening. So you have to move. You have to be prepared to hop back in the bank or get into the shallows and go for a little ride. I've taken the river runs through it spill a few times where I'm a little bit out there in the river, and this is when I'm personally fishing. I don't ever put clients in an unsafe position, but I do put myself, when I'm angling by myself, sometimes in an unsafe position. I've taken some rides through some class 2, class 3 rapids before in my waders.
Have you really?
Yep.
With a pack of smokes under your hat?
No smokes. But I don't smoke, but a lot of guys do, because like I alluded to before, it keeps the bugs away. So yeah, just a great scene from the movie. River runs through it for people who aren't familiar.
Oh my gosh. Well, don't do that, folks at home.
Yeah. So how do I land them with a client? We move, right? If the fish is, I try to get people to get on the reel as quickly as possible, especially when you're dealing with whitewater. But if a fish wants to take, we don't set the drag too tight, because I want to let them run and tire out, because they're such a high energy fish that, you'll lose them at the net a lot of the time if they're not quite tuckered out enough. You also don't want to over tire them either. But, I tell people when they're not running, now's your time to gain on them. So that's when it's time to crank down the reel.
Crank them in.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not a fish most of the time that you're just going to horse right in. It's not like you're just going to reel them right in, unless there's a little one. But it's a fish that's going to give you 4, 5, 10-minute fight if it's of a good size.
Wow. What kind of rod weights and lines and leaders and stuff are you using?
Yeah, so pretty typical. Anywhere from a 5, 6 weight's good. 4 weight, if you can handle it, is good too for people who are kind of looking for a little extra bend or challenge. But I love 10-foot rods, Steve, and the biggest reason is because, like I've alluded to, we have a lot of pocket water.
Yeah, perfect.
Sometimes you can't cast across these rivers that have multiple changing currents, because you're never going to get a good presentation. So that extra foot from a 9-foot rod, I'll even fish a 10-6 at times too. But that extra foot and a half can help you just high stick and reach, right? You got your elbow up high and you're just reaching over into a pocket. I love 10-foot rods. I preach it. I don't fish short rods on big rivers like that, because I like to move with my feet, and I like to move with my rod, be able to reach my rod out a little further.
What about like tippets? How far down do you have to go with your tippet?
Yeah. So I like to say that, a lot of the rivers we fish heavy tippets. We like 3X. We like 4X.
Okay.
Very rarely am I going down to a 5X, unless if I know that I'm in an area where we're targeting smaller fish. And that's usually with beginners sometimes, the beginning of the day, just something to cut their teeth on. But a lot of 3X, 4X, anything subsurface, I'm fishing fluorocarbon, not because of the clearness. A lot of people fish fluoro because it's kind of a see-through leader or tippet or whatever, but I do it because of the abrasion resistance to it.
Oh, nice.
These fish are smart, man. They're going to get you down by logs. They're going to get you near rocks. And I mean, I've had line literally just break off in the middle of the line, not at a knot, not at the fly, just get carved off on a rock or something.
Something sharp down there.
Yeah, so I love 3X, 4X fluoro. They do not care in these rivers if you're 2 feet away from them.
Really?
Yeah, they don't get spooked very easily because there's just so much cover for them between the freestone boulders, the logs, and the white wall.
Oh, that's kind of fun.
But if you're a person who beats up a pool, like you're just slapping down bad cast, you're going to turn them off too, though, with that.
Yeah.
But they're not afraid to be right next to you.
All right. So just closing the show out here, Aaron. So we talked all about Maine and landlocked salmon and the West Branch. What do you want people to come away knowing about Maine that maybe they didn't know before the show?
Yeah, Maine's just an incredible place to come. And a lot of people come here to go to Portland. We have fantastic restaurants, breweries in Portland. I know breweries are a big thing on your show.
Oh, yeah.
I love Allagash is a very popular brewery that we have here. And Lone Pine is another great, just a personal favorite, but there are just so many to explore. A lot of people come to Maine for the coast. They come here or they go to Acadia National Park, which is a very, very popular spot. But I urge people to go inland, go to the mountains, go to the rivers in between the mountains. You can fish for whatever you want here. I mean, we just have such a crazy, diverse menu of fish to go after here on the fly. So
yeah, it sounds awesome. It's on my bucket list.
It's a spot where you want to come, and you know what? It's not always staying at a lodge or staying at, we do have plenty of good lodges here though that are fishing lodges, and they can get you into some really remote areas, which is very cool. But it's a place for the hardy person to come. The person who doesn't mind tenting out, the person who doesn't mind long drives up dirt roads and stuff,
That sounds awesome. How can people get in touch with you, Aaron?
Yeah, so my website is very simply, it's very long, but it's mainflyfishingguides.com. On Instagram, I actually have 2 pages. I have at Rangeley Fly Guide, and then I also have at the Maine Fly Fishing Podcast. So those are my...
Very good. Well, folks, get in touch with Aaron if you want to go fishing. And thanks for listening. And hey, thanks so much for being on the podcast, Aaron. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Steve, it's been a pleasure. And just thank you very much for letting me share what Maine has to offer.
Heck yeah. Yeah. Hey, I wish you extraordinary success with your family and all your adventures to come. And we'll be sure to post pictures of Aaron's top flies on our Facebook and Instagram page. If he hasn't changed his mind, that is. And
absolutely not.
Hey, if you have comments or suggestions, love to hear from you. Feel free to DM me on Instagram or email me at seg50@gmail.com. And be sure to give us a like, share, or follow on your social media. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. As always, our music is by a Brothers Fountain, a great little band out of Colorado. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again soon.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.